The alien girl was terrified, until the silent human changed everything. First contact in darkness. The prison transport vessel Nemesis drifted like a wounded animal through the empty vacuum of the Orion arm, its engines sputtering in the darkness of space. Inside holding Cell 17, Thalia pressed herself against the far wall, her luminescent skin flickering with patterns of fear. Her large, opalescent eyes darted nervously around the confined space as the ship groaned and shuddered around her. Thalia was Lumidian, the last scout from a peaceful civilization that had crossed paths with humanity at precisely the wrong moment in their expansion. Her slender form trembled as the emergency lights pulsed crimson, casting eerie shadows across her silvery skin. The patterns that danced across her body, intricate swirls that served as both communication and camouflage for her people, betrayed her terror with rapid, chaotic flashes. 3 cycles had passed since her capture, or perhaps 4. Time blurred together in this metal cage where the recycled air tasted of desperation and machine oil. All she knew was that she was Lumidian, daughter of a species that communicated through light and touch, who had never developed weapons because they had never needed them, until humans arrived at the edges of their territory. The ship lurched violently, sending Thalia tumbling across the floor. Something had gone catastrophically wrong with the Nemesis. The constant hum of engines that had become white noise suddenly ceased, plunging the vessel into an unnatural silence broken only by distant alarms and the hiss of failing life support systems. The cell door slid open with a reluctant groan, its locking mechanism disabled by the power failure. Thalia froze, certain this was some cruel trick. Freedom couldn't be this simple. But when no guards appeared, she cautiously approached the opening, her bioluminescent patterns shifting to a muted blue of confusion and wariness. The corridor beyond lay in partial darkness, emergency lighting creating pools of dim illumination at irregular intervals. Bodies of human crew members lay scattered and still, not dead, she realized as she crept closer, but unconscious. Something had knocked out the humans but left her unaffected. Perhaps an atmospheric anomaly their physiology couldn't withstand. Thalia hesitated only briefly before slipping into the corridor. Freedom beckoned, even if it meant navigating a crippled vessel adrift in unknown space. She would find an escape pod, plot a course home, warn her people. A shadow moved at the corridor's end. Thalia's luminescence dimmed instinctively, an evolutionary response to danger. She pressed herself against the wall, willing her body to blend with the metal surroundings. The shadow resolved into a human form, tall and broad-shouldered, moving with deliberate caution through the listing vessel. Unlike the other humans, this one was conscious and alert. The figure wore no military uniform, just utilitarian clothing with too many pockets and boots that made surprisingly little noise against the metal flooring. A civilian, a prisoner like herself. The human carried no visible weapons, which struck Thalia as either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish. The human stopped, head tilting slightly as if sensing her presence. Then, before she could retreat, dark eyes locked onto her partially concealed form. For an endless moment, neither moved. Thalia's heart hammered in her chest, her skin rippling with patterns of alarm and preparation for flight. The human raised empty hands slowly, a universal gesture of peace. Then, more surprisingly, the human pressed a finger to lips in what Thalia recognized from her cultural studies as a request for silence. The figure gestured toward the far end of the corridor and then pointed upward. Something was above them. Thalia remained frozen, caught between instinctual fear and the dawning realization that this human might be her only chance of survival. The vessel groaned again, more ominously this time, and a decision crystallized in her mind. With careful movements, she stepped fully into the corridor's dim light. The human's eyes widened slightly, perhaps at her willingness to reveal herself, or perhaps at the shifting luminescent patterns that now displayed her cautious consideration. Up close, she could see this human was different from her captors. Weather-beaten skin, eyes that held neither malice nor fear, just focused intensity and exhaustion. A jagged scar ran from temple to jaw, telling stories of past violence survived. "Can you understand me?" the human whispered, voice unexpectedly gentle. Thalia nodded. Her translation implant had been one thing her captors hadn't removed. "Name's Rowan," the human said, gaze constantly scanning their surroundings. "This ship is coming apart. We have maybe 30 minutes before life support fails completely." Not military, then. The clipped precision of the soldiers who had captured her was absent from this human speech. Thalia's patterns shifted to interrogative blues and greens. "Why help me?" she managed, her voice musical and strange in the dead air of the corridor. Rowan's mouth curved slightly. "Because unlike these idiots," a nod toward the unconscious guards, "I know you're not the enemy, and because neither of us is getting off this wreck alone." A distant crash echoed through the ship, followed by the high-pitched whine of stressed metal. Rowan gestured forward. "Escape pods are 2 levels up. Can you move quickly?" Thalia straightened to her full height, nearly matching the humans. "I can outrun any human," she said with a flash of pride that surprised even her. "Good," Rowan replied, almost smiling, "because we're not the only ones awake anymore." As if summoned by the words, a sound reached them, the unmistakable clatter of multiple footsteps approaching from an adjacent corridor. Rowan's expression hardened. "Those aren't friends," the human muttered, reaching into one of those many pockets to produce a small tool that expanded with a flick into something that could serve as a weapon. The crash woke something up in cargo hold, be something they were transporting alongside you. Thalia's skin flickered with patterns of alarm. "What?" "Questions later," Rowan said, already moving. "Now we run." And so began the strangest alliance Thalia could have imagined. Trapped on a failing prison transport with a silent human who seemed determined to save her life. As they sprinted through the labyrinthine corridors, evading whatever horror had been unleashed in the cargo hold, Thalia's terror began to transform into something else. A reluctant hope that perhaps not all humans were the monsters her people feared. Rowan navigated the ship with the confidence of someone intimately familiar with its layout, occasionally holding up a hand to halt their progress when danger threatened. Each time, the human's instincts proved correct. Thalia found herself following without question, her natural distrust gradually giving way to a grudging respect. They paused at a junction where 3 corridors met, Rowan's breathing controlled but labored. The human glanced back at her, studying the patterns that rippled across her skin. "Your people, you communicate with those lights?" Rowan asked quietly. Thalia nodded, surprised by the question. "Words are supplementary for us. The patterns convey emotion, intention, truth." "What are they saying now?" Rowan's gaze was unexpectedly intense. Thalia looked down at her own skin where complex patterns of blue, violet, and amber swirled together. "Confusion," she admitted, "fear, and gratitude." Rowan nodded once, seemingly satisfied. "Upper deck is through there. 2 more turns and we reach the escape pod bay." "If there are pods left," Thalia said softly. "There will be," Rowan replied with quiet certainty. "The crew evacuated toward the forward bays. These are reserves." A screeching sound from behind them cut the conversation short. Something was tearing through metal, something that wanted very much to find them. Unspoken alliance. The shrieking of metal echoed through the corridors of the Nemesis, growing louder with each passing moment. Thalia's luminescence pulsed with alarm as Rowan grabbed her wrist and pulled her into a maintenance shaft barely wide enough for the human's shoulders. "What is that?" Thalia whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Rowan's face hardened in the dim emergency lighting. "Hexapods, biological weapons designed for ship infiltration. They were transporting a dormant clutch to the military research facility on Ganymede." "And the crash woke them," Thalia concluded, her patterns shifting to a deep indigo of comprehension. They hunt by sound and heat signatures, Rowan explained, voice barely audible. Your bioluminescence doesn't register on their sensory apparatus. Lucky for you. They crouched in silence as something large scuttled past their hiding place, a nightmare of chitin and metal augmentations that Thalia only glimpsed before squeezing her eyes shut. The creature paused, articulated limbs tapping against the floor in an unsettling rhythm, before continuing its hunt. Rowan waited 10 heartbeats after the sounds faded before gesturing forward. We move now. Stay close. The journey to the escape pod bay became a terrifying game of hide-and-seek, with the human displaying an almost preternatural awareness of when to advance and when to conceal themselves. Twice more they encountered hexapods, each time evading detection by mere seconds. "Why are you helping me?" Thalia asked during one of their brief respites, her curiosity finally overcoming caution. "Your people captured mine. We're enemies." Rowan's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in those dark eyes. "I'm not military. I'm a salvage operator. Was on my way to assess a derelict in the Tau sector when your people's distress signal diverted me. By the time I arrived, the military had already intervened." "You were following me," Thalia realized. "Following the nemesis," Rowan corrected, trying to understand why defense forces were engaging a species with no weapons technology when they captured you instead of establishing diplomatic contact. The human shrugged. "Let's just say it confirmed some suspicions about certain factions within Earth Command." Before Thalia could process this revelation, they reached a sealed doorway marked with warning symbols. Rowan placed a palm against the access panel, which surprisingly illuminated at the touch. "You have clearance?" Thalia asked, patterns swirling with surprise. "Not exactly," Rowan murmured, producing a small device from another pocket. "Just friends in interesting places." The door slid open with a reluctant hiss, revealing a small chamber containing 3 escape pods. 2 appeared functional, their status lights glowing a reassuring green. Relief washed over Thalia in waves of golden light that rippled across her skin. Freedom was within reach. Then she noticed Rowan wasn't moving toward the pods but instead toward a communication terminal. "What are you doing?" she asked, tension returning to her voice. "Buying us time," Rowan replied, fingers flying across the interface, "and making sure someone knows what really happened here." The terminal flickered to life, revealing a command sequence Thalia didn't recognize. Rowan worked with focused intensity, occasionally muttering under breath as systems accepted or rejected commands. "There's a resistance network," the human explained without looking up. "People who believe first contact should be handled differently, who think weaponizing everything that moves isn't the path to a peaceful galaxy." Thalia moved closer, fascinated despite her urgency to leave. "Humans who disagree with humans, this concept is unfamiliar to my people." A ghost of a smile touched Rowan's lips. "We're contradictory by nature. It's probably both our greatest strength and worst failing." The terminal chimed softly as the transmission completed. Rowan straightened, satisfaction evident in the relaxed set of shoulders. "Coordinates for your homeworld." Thalia hesitated, patterns fluctuating between trust and suspicion. "I understand," Rowan said softly. "I wouldn't trust me either, but I'm giving you this pod." The human gestured to the nearest craft. "I'll take the other. Once we're clear, we go our separate ways. You warn your people, I warn mine." A deafening crash from the corridor announced that their pursuers had found them. The door wouldn't hold against determined hexapods. "Decision time," Rowan urged, moving toward the second pod. Something shifted in Thalia's understanding, a recognition that perhaps the universe was more complex than the binary of friend and enemy she had been taught. This human, this Rowan, had risked everything to help her when they had no obligation to do so. "Wait," she called, her voice cutting through the chaos of alarms and approaching creatures. "Come with me." Rowan turned, genuine surprise evident. What? My people need to understand that not all humans seek dominion, Thalia explained, patterns shifting to a resolute azure. And your resistance needs a first-hand account of Lumidian culture. We both have stories that need telling. The door behind them buckled as multiple impacts tested its integrity. Rowan's expression transformed from surprise to something warmer, something that made Thalia's dual hearts beat in an unfamiliar rhythm. "Are you certain?" the human asked. "No," Thalia admitted honestly, "but neither was I certain of surviving this ship, yet here we stand." A decisive nod, and then they were both rushing toward the same pod. Rowan sealed the hatch just as the door gave way, revealing the monstrous forms of the hexapods swarming into the bay. The pod systems engaged with a reassuring hum, artificial gravity stabilizing as they disengaged from the dying nemesis. Through the viewport, they watched the prison transport recede, its hull breached in multiple locations, atmosphere venting in crystalline plumes that sparkled in the light of a distant sun. "It's beautiful," Thalia murmured, "even in its destruction." Rowan settled into the co-pilot's seat, studying her with quiet intensity. "Many things are both beautiful and dangerous. It doesn't make them less worth understanding." The statement hung between them, laden with meaning that transcended their species' differences. In the confined space of the escape pod, Thalia's luminescence cast gentle patterns across the control panels and Rowan's weathered features. "Your lights," Rowan observed, "they're different now." Thalia glanced down, surprised to see the complex interplay of rose and golden amber flowing across her skin, patterns of trust, hope, and something more elemental that her people rarely displayed to outsiders. "Connection," she explained softly. "Among my kind, these patterns are intimate, shared only with those we consider kin." "And am I kin now?" Rowan asked, voice gentle but serious. Thalia considered the human who had defied expectations, who had risked everything to save an alien prisoner, who now sat beside her in a tiny vessel bound for unknown stars. "Not yet," she answered truthfully, "but perhaps something equally important, a beginning." Rowan's smile then was genuine, transforming that serious face into something Thalia found unexpectedly captivating. Around them, the escape pod's navigation system calculated their trajectory away from human space, toward the distant nebula that sheltered Thalia's homeworld. "A beginning," Rowan echoed, offering a hand in the human gesture of agreement. Thalia's fingers, slender and luminescent, intertwined with Rowan's broader, darker ones. Where they touched, her bioluminescence brightened, casting their joined hands in a warm glow that seemed to push back the darkness of space itself. The terror that had defined their first meeting dissolved into something neither had anticipated, a connection that transcended the boundaries of their species, a silent understanding that perhaps the greatest discoveries weren't planets or technologies, but the bridges built between different worlds. As stars streaked past their viewport, Thalia realized that for the first time since her capture, the patterns across her skin showed no trace of fear. Instead, they pulsed with the steady rhythm of hope, for herself, for Rowan, and for the possibility that their unlikely alliance might change the course of two civilizations. In the vastness of space, their small vessel carried not just two beings from distant worlds, but a story waiting to be told, of terror transformed through understanding, of silence filled with meaning, and of how sometimes the most profound changes begin not with grand gestures, but with the simple decision to help someone different from yourself.